Well, we've come to the end of the road for the Battle of France diorama. Today, I'll be finishing up the chipping, tools, and mud on the Renault R35. I started by mixing all the base coat paint with Vallejo's Iraqi sand. This desaturates the colors and makes for a great base for chipping. Now, I'm modeling this tank before it goes into battle, so I'm only trying to show some light wear and tear, where maybe it drove through some underbrush or through some trees. So I'm not trying to replicate real battle damage here. I started off with some sponge chips and then went back through with the brush and pulled out some highlighted areas and made some subtle scratches. For the larger areas, I wanted to make sure I chipped the correct chip color to the correct base color. So for that, I brought back out the putty that I used to create the camouflage in the first place, and I masked off each individual section of color. That way, when I went back through with the sponge, I could get into every nook and cranny I wanted to and not have to worry about accidentally hitting the wrong scratch color to the wrong base color. This actually, despite the added work putting it down, made the chipping process go much faster. I also had no issue putting the putty on already weathered paint. It came off just fine and didn't mar the surface at all, or leave any grease. For the running gear, I didn't have to use the putty. I just chipped it as I normally would any other solid surface. I then went back through with a brush and highlighted all the raised areas, all the bolts, grab handles, and anything else that would catch the light and change that color to be a little lighter. It's a little artistic, but I think it looks nice on a finished model. Just remember to keep track of all the different colors in a complex color scheme such as this, so you don't miss anything. I picked up this Vallejo rust and streaking set, not sponsored, and I figured I would give this a try for the rusty exhaust. I basically followed the directions exactly how they come in the box, and it's basically kind of going back and forth with dark browns and light rusts in various fashions. I did some brushing, I did some sponge chips, and it actually comes with a rust wash as well. And I think the results were pretty good. They look a little bit different than what I'm used to doing, but again, maybe because I'm trying to represent a newer tank here, that the exhaust wouldn't be completely rusted through, and maybe it would just be some surface rust. And I feel like this replicates that pretty well for what it is, and it's mostly hidden, so I think it's okay. Next, it was on to the tools. This tank has the shovel and hammer and crowbar all modeled together with some leather straps. A lot of people take this apart and show this differently, but I figured again, new tank, I'd leave it on there. Plus it was easier. I just went over this with some silver and then a light glaze of some browns, and I went back and forth, and I was actually really happy with how this came out. I think I'm getting that glazing blending technique down pat a little bit, thanks to everyone's comments in last week's video. I really thinned it out and just stippled this back and forth. You can see some lighter areas and then I stippled some darker tones back over that, and kind of got everything to blend together. And I was really happy with how that looked, kind of a lightly worn, maybe used a few times look. Then I started painting the wooden handles, and which was tricky because, again, this is molded as one piece. So in between each tool, there is still some plastic, which I guess I could have drilled out or gotten out, but I didn't really realize that until I had started the painting process. So I'd use some washes to cover that up. Again, this isn't going to be seen very well when it's displayed, so I thought that was okay. And I think it looked pretty good. And tuck that in there before the exhaust goes on. I painted the chain off camera, which was tricky, but I used the same process, and all the other tools as well. Next came time to add the mud to the running gear and all over the rest of the tank. As you know, this tank is going to be set in a river crossing, so I wanted to make sure there was a lot of fresh mud all over the tracks, the wheels, and anywhere else that it would be kicked up along the way. So I added some static grass to the mixture as well to make it look a little bit more organic, and I spread it all over the tank. Now the base of this mud mixture is muddy ground from AK, and it is acrylic. So I then just used tap water to blend this mixture out, and you can see I got some really nice opacity in it, and it spread really easily and blended really easily as well. And I just went back and forth with a wet brush and a dry brush and just made sure it was on every surface that I thought mud would accumulate. And now it is finally time to place the tank in its final resting place alongside the river that it has just trekked through. I just used regular PVA glue to stick it down, and then I wanted to make sure it looked like it had sank down into the wet earth. And I used the same mixture that I put on the tracks and the same mixture that I put all over the tank and that I made the ground with. That way it would look like it was actually sitting in the ground. Then I wanted to see if I could create some highlights on some of the mud that maybe had been sitting out and drying just a little bit. I want to do this very sparingly, just on some edges, some nuts and bolts, and maybe I tried a little bit on the edges of the tracks that would have been furthest away from going through the water. Now that's probably a little unrealistic, and I end up blending a lot of that in so you can't really see it, but I did want to see some subtle variations in the mud tones. So I kind of went back and forth with this. I used Aqualine from Wilder, and that's really forgiving, and you can get some of that off if you are a little too heavy-handed. But that was the last step. The most important part in this is knowing when you're done, and I think we've worked on this diorama long enough. Thank you so much for following along over these last few weeks. I'm really excited about the next ones to come. Please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more, and we'll see you next time.